to my channel, the Pharma Tutor, and today we're back with another topic from ANS Pharmacology series, and that is about the functions of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We all know that sympathetic nervous system is the system that is stimulated during fight or flight situation, or when we talk about parasympathetic, so it is stimulated in rest and digest situations, right? So now, what is the purpose of studying these systems in ANS pharmacology? So basically, when drug impacts autonomic nervous system, so these drugs either increase the functions of sympathetic system or parasympathetic system, right? So today I'm going to explain you the functions of sympathetic and parasympathetic system, and moreover along with that I will tell you the purpose of sympathetic and parasympathetic system in regulating the functions, right? So I'm not just going to tell you about the functions, but I will also tell you the reason that why something is increasing or decreasing under that system, right? Now, I want you to imagine that you're walking home at night and suddenly dog starts running towards you. Now, without thinking, your heart beats faster, your breathing increases, your pupil becomes large, and you start sweating, right? So, who caused all these changes? Obviously, the sympathetic nervous system. Now, I want you to also imagine that you are at home, sitting safely, your heartbeat slows down and digestion starts, your body relaxes. So what causes all these changes? Obviously, the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So now let us understand in detail how one system is like an accelerator and the other as brake of the body. Before that, let me first once again tell you about ANS, that ANS is divided into three divisions, but right now I'm telling you that it is divided into sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system, and both are involuntary in their actions. So let us discuss each of them individually in detail, right? So this is a system in which which prepares body for emergency situations. We all know that emergency situations, right? So what can be the possible situations? It can be triple F, which is like fight, flight, or fear, or other situations such as stress, trauma, exercise like hard exercises, or hypoglycemia, moreover cold exposure. These are all the situations in which sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, right? So they activate sympathetic system, and sympathetic system produces the effect or regulates different functions within the body. Now we're going to discuss what are the functions or main functions which are stimulated and activated by sympathetic nervous system, right? The functions of sympathetic nervous system, I will first talk about the organ and then how it is affected, right? So first let us talk about the heart, right? In sympathetic nervous system, you should remember that heart rate increases. Moreover, cardiac output also increases, and contractility of the heart also increases, right? Contractility means the increased force of contraction of heart, right? And why this happen? Obviously, because more blood needs to be reached towards the muscles, right? Secondly, when we talk about the blood vessels, so you have to remember that there is mostly vasoconstriction in sympathetic nervous system, but when we talk about the skeletal muscles or the blood flow towards the skeletal muscles, then there is vasodilation, right? Vasodilation occurs, and that's how the blood flow towards the skeletal muscles, and there is decreased blood flow towards skin and intestine, right? So skeletal muscles, blood flow is increased. Thirdly, when we talk about the GIT, gastrointestinal tract, then we should know that when you run from danger, then digestion doesn't matter to you, right? So in GIT, motility means contractions, motility decreases, motility of the GIT decreases, and secretions, GIT secretions also decreases, right? Secondly, what is the reason for the decrease in digestion? Then obviously the body needs to save energy, and that's why it reduces some of its functions, right? And digestion is one of them. Now let us talk about the lungs, right? Lungs. When we talk about lungs, then in situations where you are frightened or you are scared, then your body requires more oxygen, right? So there is more bronchodilation. Right? The bronchioles, there is greater dilation of the bronchi, right? Bronchi dilates more, right? When we talk about liver, so you have to remember that there is increased release of glucose, right? Because muscles need fuel, and that fuel is overcome by the release of glucose from the liver, right? Now when we talk about the glands, so the gland that is stimulated in sympathetic system is basically the sweat gland. So you have to remember that the sweating increases in sympathetic system, right? And not the salivation. I'm talking about sweating, right? Sweating increases in sympathetic system to prevent overheating of the body, right? Salivation is basically a type of secretion that is stimulated and increased during parasympathetic system. So you have to remember the difference between the types of secretion that are stimulated in different systems, right? Now when I talk about the eye, so there is dilation of the pupil in eye. Pupil dilates in sympathetic system. It is also known as mydriasis, right? You will study this term all along in the further chapters, mydriasis and meiosis. So pupil basically dilates, and it is obviously to allow more light and for better vision in fight or flight situations, right? Now after that, when I talk about the bladder, so the function of the bladder, you have to understand this, like you have to be focused right now over it, because when I talk about the bladder, so you have to remember that sympathetic system basically relaxes the detrusor muscles, or you can say the bladder wall, right? So when the detrusor muscles are relaxed, bladder store more urine, right? The bladder stores more urine, right? The bladder stores more urine. But you have to remember that this doesn't mean that there is more urination, because when the detrusor muscles are relaxed, then the sphincter muscles are contracted, right? And that prevents urination, right? So you should know that in fight or flight situations, there is prevention of the urination or inhibition of the urination, right? So SNS simply store the urine, but it inhibits the urination, right? 9 function, it is about the kidney. So you also have to remember this function, because you will study about this in most of the drugs and mechanism of actions. So basically when we talk about the kidney, you have to remember in sympathetic system, the blood flow to kidneys decreases, because we know that the blood flow to the main organs of the body, like heart, blood flow to heart and brain and skeletal muscles, blood flow to these regions increases. So obviously the blood flow towards the kidney decreases, right? So now in order to maintain this blood pressure and blood flow, the kidney releases renin, right? So then this renin, when this renin is released, this renin activates the RAS system, that is the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, and this system then in response increase the blood pressure, right? and that's how the blood pressure is, or the blood flow is regulated and maintained in kidney, right? So this is how it goes. The sympathetic system goes in kidney and regulates the blood pressure in kidney, right? Now here I'm going to draw a chart in which I'm going to explain that when the danger is, perceived by human senses, then how it is responded by the body systems such as nervous system and endocrine system, right, simultaneously, because most of the students get confused among both of these systems and working of these systems. So I'm going to explain you in a simple chart, right? So first of all, when there is a danger, right, so sensory receptors are stimulated, right? These sensory receptors transmit the signals to brain, and from brain the sensory information travels to hypothalamus. From hypothalamus, the sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, right? I hope this is clear to you, that I'm talking about the fight or flight situations that occur around you, and then the sensory receptor stimulated that sends the sensory information towards brain and then towards hypothalamus, and then finally the sympathetic nervous system is stimulated. Now this system transmit the signals or sensory information to adrenal medulla or sympathetic nerves, right? So from here the signals are traveled to different systems of the body, right? The adrenal medulla is like obviously the endocrine system and sympathetic nerves. Endocrine system and sympathetic nerves. Now I'm going to tell you that how both of these systems respond simultaneously, right? First, when I talk about the sympathetic nerves, remember that norepinephrine neurotransmitter is released as the sympathetic nerves are stimulated, and this neurotransmitter directly stimulates many organs like heart, right? Heart rate increases, or it stimulates the pupils directly, right? Or it stimulates the GIT activity decreases, pupils are dilated, right? So when we talk about the second system, that is the endocrine system, so the information is sent to the adrenal medulla, and I already told you in the previous video that adrenal medulla does not possess any postganglionic fiber. Only the preganglionic fibers directly stimulate the adrenal medulla, and that causes the release of the neurotransmitters. Two types of neurotransmitters are released: epinephrine, which is released 80%, and norepinephrine is released 20%. And then these neurotransmitters travels to the bloodstream, right? And through the blood prolonged response is generated, right? Now, what is the difference between two systems? The difference is that the nerves provide the immediate target response, as I told you here. Immediate targeted response was produced here, but when we talk about the adrenal hormones, they spread and sustain the response throughout the body, right? That is why the sympathetic system is known as the diffused system, right? Because meanwhile the immediate responses are produced by the sympathetic nerves, the prolonged and you can say the widespread responses are produced by the endocrine system, right? The adrenal medulla. That's why sympathetic system is diffuse system, because it activates many organs simultaneously, right? Now we all know that the body will not always stay in the emergency situation forever, right? If you're scared, you will not remain scared forever, right? Body needs a rest, right? That's why to maintain the homeostasis and to bring body back to normal functioning and back to its normal state, we need another system, and that is known as parasympathetic nervous system, right? This is a system to restore body back to its normal functioning, and this system is activated in rest, or you may say digest, or repair situations, right? And also to conserve energy in the body, right? So these are all the purposes which are addressed by the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So let us discuss the functions which are like opposite to the sympathetic functions. So let us take a quick review of the functions of parasympathetic system. First, heart rate. So obviously in sympathetic system, heart rate was increasing, cardiac output was increasing, contractility of the heart was increasing. So here the heart rate would decrease, cardiac output decrease, and contractility hence decrease. When we talk about the eyes, so you have to take in consideration that when there was sympathetic system, there was dilation of the pupil, that was known as mydriasis. When we talk about parasympathetic, then in relaxed state the pupils are constricted, right? The pupil constrict. This is known as meiosis, right? In like further chapters we'll discuss this in detail. Third, when we talk about lungs, so there is bronchoconstriction, right? Fourth, when we talk about bladder, there is more urination. Remember that in the previous situation there was more storage of urine but not the urination. In this system there is more urination. When we talk about the rectum, there is more defecation. When we talk about the salivary gland, as I already told you that in that situation in sympathetic system, sweat glands, they were stimulated and they were activated and the sweating was more. When we talk about parasympathetic, then there is more salivation. You have to remember that salivation increases. And moreover, this system is more specific system. Why? Because I already told you in the previous video that parasympathetic system has the shorter postganglionic fibers, and the ganglion and the postganglionic fibers were closer to the effector organs, due to which the response that was produced was quite discrete response, right? The preganglionic fibers were quite large and the postganglionic fibers were small and closer to the effector organs. Thus, the response that was produced was quite related to only the effector organ and not other organs. So this system basically innervates specific organs like gut, heart, and eye, right? Next we have the comparison table, so that it maybe you would easily understand the comparison and the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic system. Obviously this system is all about fight or flight situations. This is about rest and digest. The brain, it is quite ultra focused, and in parasympathetic it is calm and relaxed. When we talk about, as I already told you about the eyes, pupil dilates here, that is known as mydriasis. Pupil constricts here, that is known as meiosis. And then salivary glands, it is quite stimulated in parasympathetic system, right? When we talk about heart, there is increased heart rate in sympathetic and decrease in parasympathetic. Blood vessels, there is mostly vasoconstriction but vasodilation in skeletal muscles to increase the blood flow in skeletal muscles. And when we talk about the lungs, there is bronchodilation in sympathetic system, whereas bronchoconstriction in parasympathetic system. When we talk about GIT, motility decreases in sympathetic system and increases in parasympathetic system, right? When we talk about liver, there is more increased glucose in sympathetic system, whereas decreased or storage of glucose in parasympathetic. When we talk about adrenal medulla, in sympathetic, it stimulates and releases epinephrine and norepinephrine, and that's how it goes to everything I already described earlier, right? The functions of the organs according to the sequence, like start from the top and then travel like from lacrimal glands and then travel to the eye. You can remember that in sympathetic stimulation there is dilation of the pupil. When we talk about parasympathetic, there is constriction of the pupil and so on. And then talking about the salivary glands, then there is more salivation in parasympathetic and less in sympathetic. And when we talk about sweating, there is more sweating in sympathetic and less in parasympathetic. So you have to remember these functions by competing both of them, either of them like with each other, right? And that's how travel from top to bottom, and that's how you can like remember these functions properly, right? Then you know that in when we talk about heart, there's increased heart rate in sympathetic and decrease in parasympathetic. Adrenal medulla stimulated in sympathetic. When we talk about kidney, so blood flow to kidney decreases, and there is increased secretion of renin. You have to remember these functions in order to understand further chapters, because drugs either mimic the functions of these sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system or oppose them. If you would know about basic functions of both these systems, it would be easy for you to memorize drugs and their mechanism of actions, right? That's all for today. Hope you like the video. Thank you so much for watching.